She once captured America's heart with her powerful performance in The Blind Side, a role that earned her an Oscar and nationwide acclaim. But what no one saw coming was what happened just weeks later. A deeply personal scandal forced Sandra Bullock to quietly pack her things and leave the very home she had built. But that moment wasn't the end of her story. It was a turning point. Sandra didn't crumble. She rose even stronger. Today, she's known as the Queen of the Box Office. She lives in a multi-million-dollar estate in Beverly Hills, where she tends to her garden with her own hands and quietly donates millions to community programs across the country. It's a life far from flashy, yet one that commands respect, even in Hollywood. Because when everything fell apart, Sandra didn't complain. She rebuilt, piece by piece, in a way that left many in awe. In this video, we'll take a closer look at the remarkable story behind Sandra Bullock's comeback and the quiet strength that helped her rise from heartbreak to become one of the most admired women in entertainment. While her mother stood beneath the grand lights of the opera stage, little Sandra Bullock sat quietly backstage, unseen, unnoticed. But years later, it was Sandra who would make the world stop and listen. Born in Virginia, Sandra spent much of her childhood moving across Europe due to her parents' careers. Her mother, a German opera singer, was often on tour, and her father worked for the U.S. military stationed overseas. They took her from Nuremberg to Vienna, from Salzburg to other historic cities, where music echoed through grand concert halls. But for Sandra, these places were only temporary stops. Nowhere ever felt like home. With constant moves, friendships never had time to form. Loneliness became a quiet companion throughout her early years. She found a bit of joy in singing with a children's choir at church. Her voice, pure and warm, once filled chapels and small stages. But just as people began to notice her, it would be time to leave again. She never stayed long enough to be remembered. And so, Sandra learned to live with solitude, and from it grew a deep sense of independence. There was a moment, one afternoon after school, when she slipped and fell into a small creek by the roadside. No one was there to help. No one saw it happen, and there was no one to tell afterward. She simply stood up, brushed the mud from her clothes, and walked on. The small scar beneath her left eye remains to this day. It's not large, but it's a quiet reminder. Sometimes it's the falls that teach us how to stand stronger. Later, when her family settled more permanently and returned to the U.S., Sandra went to school in Virginia. She tried to blend in, joining the cheerleading squad, taking part in school plays. But her quiet demeanor, her European-tinged accent, and those thoughtful, worldly eyes set her apart. It wasn't easy for a girl like that to fit in, and yet it was exactly that sense of not quite belonging that quietly nurtured her love for acting, a place where she didn't have to explain why she was different. Sandra's childhood wasn't one of material hardship, but it wasn't peaceful either. She had no permanent roots, but she carried a quiet strength. It was as if all that constant movement had shaped a soul that knew how to listen, how to feel, and eventually how to tell stories, in many voices, from many perspectives. For anyone who grew up between homes, between schools, with that feeling of not quite fitting in, Sandra Bullock's early life isn't just the backstory of a Hollywood star. It's something deeply familiar, something real. From handing out flyers on the streets of New York just to make ends meet, to becoming the kind of actress who can silence a room with a single look. Sandra Bullock didn't get to Hollywood on luck. Every step she took was built on quiet perseverance. In the late 1980s, Sandra arrived in New York City with a degree in acting and a worn-out suitcase. She waited tables, checked coats, even cleaned homes, whatever it took to stay afloat in the city and keep her dream of acting alive. Her days were filled with auditions, intense, competitive, and full of rejection. At night, she returned to her small rented apartment, sat in a cramped kitchen, rehearsing lines to herself, wondering, has anyone ever started this way and still made it? It was in those quiet, uncertain nights that something important was forged: steadiness, emotional depth, and a way of acting that wasn't born from training alone, but from real-life experience. Then, in 1993, a door opened. Her role in Demolition Man, opposite action star Sylvester Stallone, gave Sandra her first real taste of Hollywood. But it wasn't the breakthrough. The spotlight still hadn't turned fully in her direction. That would come a year later, with Speed, 1994. But even then, the role of Annie Porter wasn't written with her in mind. The studio wanted a bigger name, someone who looked the part of a Hollywood leading lady, someone glamorous enough to play opposite Keanu Reeves. Sandra, with her unassuming looks and understated style, wasn't their first or even second choice. But director Jan de Bont saw something different. Not a striking appearance, but an honesty and natural energy that was hard to find. He insisted on seeing Sandra again. That decision would change everything. The night before her final audition, Sandra called her mother and said, "This is my last chance. I have to make it, no matter what." It was a declaration filled with determination, though underneath she was quietly afraid. She knew this role could change the course of her life. The next morning, she arrived. No flashy makeup, no showy outfit, just a simple ponytail, a worn-out blouse, and scuffed heels. But when she stepped into the scene with Keanu Reeves, something happened. The room went silent. No one took notes. No one said a word. Just Sandra, holding the space with quiet intensity. The director didn't need to see more. He turned to the producer and said, "We don't need a star. We need her." Speed would go on to earn over $350 million worldwide. Sandra Bullock, the woman once deemed too ordinary, became one of Hollywood's most in-demand actresses. Not because of glamour, but because of what had kept her going all those years in New York: authenticity and grit. Following Speed, the success kept coming. Just a few years later, she was standing on the Oscar stage, receiving a standing ovation for her powerful role in The Blind Side. America cheered. But when the applause faded and the golden statue was placed gently on the shelf, life took an unexpected turn. A private heartbreak forced her to quietly leave the very home she once called her safe haven. That, however, is a story for another time. What matters is this: Sandra kept walking forward, learning to balance success with scrutiny and fame with the need to remain grounded. Unlike Julia Roberts, who burst into stardom with Pretty Woman, Sandra chose a slower path. No major launchpad, no overnight fame, just one role at a time, like someone climbing a mountain barefoot. Painful, but real. After Speed, her paychecks soared. For the first time, she was getting offers from major studios. For the first time, she had the power to choose roles rather than waiting for a phone call. All those long, uncertain years were finally starting to bloom. For anyone who's weathered a difficult start, those early career years filled with rejection and doubt, Sandra Bullock's journey speaks softly but powerfully. Not every dream requires a miracle. Some dreams just ask that you don't give up. And when Hollywood finally stopped to say her name, Sandra Bullock stepped into a new chapter, not just one of box office success, but of living life on her own terms. Step into Sandra Bullock's world, where every wall and every chair has a story to tell. A place where the light isn't meant to impress, but to hold on to peace after decades spent in the eye of Hollywood's storm. The Beverly Hills home. A quiet gate. At the hilltop tucked away in the hills of Beverly Hills, the home Sandra purchased in 2011 stands in quiet contrast to the lavish estates often associated with Hollywood royalty. Outside, a curved black wrought iron gate in Mediterranean style opens to a white granite pathway shaded by century-old olive trees. Inside, the home spans over 8,000 square feet, with 7 bedrooms, each featuring glass doors that open to the garden, inviting in soft, natural light. The main living room is floored with smoked oak, crowned with soaring ceilings, and lit by an antique crystal chandelier rescued from a 19th century French theater. a gift she gave herself after The Blind Side. Her favorite room, surprisingly, is not the bedroom, but her private screening room. It's where she and her 2 children revisit old animated films, or sometimes quietly watch the movies she once starred in. On the second-floor balcony, a gravel-lined walkway leads to a long wicker chair pressed against the railing, where in the early mornings she often sits with a warm cup of tea, watching the sun rise over the city from the east. The wilderness home in Wyoming, a winter retreat. In stark contrast to her Beverly Hills estate, Sandra's Jackson Hole home in Wyoming is a pure reflection of her independent spirit and love for nostalgia. Built from solid pine and roofed in slate stone, the house breathes the wild, strong, serene, and deeply intentional. The entrance opens to a flagstone porch and a heavy front door made from reclaimed barnwood. Inside, gray oak floors, a honeycomb stone fireplace, caramel leather chairs, and the soothing scent of cedar. The reading room, painted in a rich burgundy hue, holds handwritten letters, old film scripts, and the children's books she once read aloud. After her personal scandal in 2010, this house became her sanctuary. Just Sandra and Louis. No paparazzi, no schedules, just quiet days gathering firewood, baking sweets, and listening to soft jazz in the evenings. Cars. A subtle yet sharp way of moving through the world. Sandra Bullock doesn't collect flashy supercars. She chooses her vehicles the same way she chooses her roles, not by trend, but by intuition. Each car in her garage reflects a moment, a mood, or a chapter in her life. Her 2025 Mercedes-Benz GLS is her go-to for long road trips with her 2 children. The matte black exterior doesn't catch the light, a deliberate choice. Inside, chocolate leather seats, spacious interiors, and a zoned climate system keep the kids comfortable. In the back, she always keeps a wool blanket, a few fairy tale books, and noise-canceling headphones, because sometimes an unexpected drive is the perfect escape. Once, after wrapping a long film shoot in Atlanta, she drove through the night to Texas. No bodyguards, no entourage, just her, the wheel, and freedom. For important meetings, she takes her 2025 Porsche Panamera, sleek and composed. Its pearl silver finish, chrome-trimmed windows, and Napa leather interior echo the elegance of 1960s design. She once told a close friend, "This car helps me remember I'm an independent woman, not just someone under a spotlight." When she steps out, no engine roar, no attention drawn. And that's exactly the point. Then there's her BMW i3, a compact electric car, nearly silent in motion and full of personal meaning. She drives it every morning to drop off Louis and Layla at school. It's eco-friendly, unassuming, and bears a small sticker on the dash that reads, "Be kind, even when no one is watching." She put it there one night after watching a documentary on compassion with her children. For Sandra, a car is never about status. It's a daily reminder of what matters most. Each car tells a story, a role without cameras, a quiet reflection of a woman who's traveled far, endured much, and chosen to live simply in a complex world. Private flights. The path to peace. Though she doesn't own a private jet, Sandra frequently charters one for privacy, especially when traveling between Los Angeles and Austin. These are mid-sized jets furnished in cream interiors with soft sheepskin seats and always stocked with her favorite light jazz albums, music that calms her in the skies. After her 2010 Oscar win, she didn't stay for the after-parties. Instead, she boarded a plane that same night, just in time to bring Louis to school the next morning. It wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was a principle. Family never comes second. Austin, the place that feels like home. In Austin, Texas, where Sandra spends most of her time, she lives in a modern farmhouse painted in soft beige with wide oak doors and a backyard that stretches to the last fence post. There's a wooden swing beneath an old oak tree where Layla used to read each afternoon, and a long outdoor dining table where she hosts small, private meals with only those closest to her. There's no security detail, No personal driver, just Sandra, often in a long sweater, barefoot in the kitchen at sunrise. Here, she's not a movie star. She's simply Mom. A deeper kind of luxury. Sandra has a very particular tradition. Once a year, she rents out an entire boutique hotel in Europe, just for her and the kids. Not for work, but to teach them about culture. Before arriving, she has the rooms redesigned to fit a memory. The scent, the lighting, even the color on the walls must echo places she's once loved. She also collects watercolor paintings by children from orphanages and charities she supports. Each one is carefully framed and hung alongside expensive pieces of art. To her, these humble works carry just as much meaning as any award. Sandra Bullock doesn't live to be admired, and yet her life quietly captivates. In a world of flash and spectacle, she chooses a quieter path, where every space, every object holds meaning. Not just wealthy, but rich with depth. Rich in a way that makes people pause. Just days ago, she stood on the stage at the Oscars, holding a golden statue and flashing a radiant smile. Days later, she quietly packed her things and left her home, carrying a heartache the whole world could see, though not once did she speak of it aloud. The year 2010 marked both triumph and heartbreak in Sandra Bullock's life. For her role in The Blind Side, she was awarded her very first Oscar, an honor that stood as a testament to decades of dedication and hard work. It was a night to remember. The audience rose to their feet, applauding the woman who had once lived in a tiny New York apartment and who now stood at the pinnacle of her craft. But mere weeks later, headlines shattered that moment of glory. The world learned that her husband, Jesse James, had been unfaithful, not just once, and not just rumors. There were facts, photos. A media frenzy erupted, with major outlets circling like hawks. For a brief moment, America seemed to fall silent, not out of shock, but out of sympathy. Sandra, the woman who had just brought home an Oscar, was now quietly enduring heartbreak within her own home. Yet, instead of speaking out or fueling the flames, she made a different choice. She left. She took her adopted son, Louis, and withdrew from the public eye, not to hide, but to protect what mattered most: family. She didn't accuse. She didn't defend. She simply took action, finalizing her divorce and soon after announcing the adoption of Louis. In the first images of her return, Sandra was seen smiling softly, holding her son's hand, not as a star bouncing back from scandal, but as a mother with newfound purpose. That same year, she continued working, starring in The Proposal, one of the most beloved romantic comedies of her career. It was a reminder of her unwavering professionalism. She didn't disappear. She raised her son, stayed grounded, and poured her energy into the things that truly mattered. Years later, when her longtime partner Brian Randall was diagnosed with ALS, a rare and devastating neurological disease, Sandra once again chose silence over spectacle. She stepped back from the spotlight and stood beside him through it all. When Brian passed away in 2023, there was no public mourning, no dramatic statement. But suddenly, ALS organizations began receiving generous anonymous donations, and many believed Sandra was behind them. These choices, the quiet ones, the steady ones, are what people remember. Not just her talent, but the grace with which she held on to her dignity when life felt most unkind. In Hollywood, a place where everything can become a publicity stunt, she chose action over reaction, stillness over noise. For many who have gone through divorce, grief, or deep personal pain, Sandra's journey resonates. Not everyone can remain calm through heartbreak, but everyone wants to. And somehow, she showed that it's possible. Through it all, Sandra's image didn't crumble, it solidified. While others may scramble to prove a point, Sandra moved forward with quiet strength, with meaningful work, and with the deep love she shares with her children. That, in the end, is the true victory. Behind the spotlight, she has built a legacy, one that doesn't need to be celebrated loudly to be remembered. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful part of her story. A legacy that continues to grow, quietly and profoundly. In the middle of Hollywood's bright lights and constant noise, she chose a different path, one that led quietly to the background, where she could help those no one was watching. Few would have guessed that the same woman who once starred in Speed, an action classic from nearly 4 decades ago, would remain so deeply connected with the public for so long without ever resorting to spectacle. And even fewer would realize that behind the hundreds of millions of dollars in box office success lies a quiet heart that never stopped giving. For years, Sandra Bullock has donated millions to the Red Cross, helping victims of natural disasters and humanitarian crises, from Hurricane Katrina to the earthquake in Haiti. There were no photo ops, no press conferences, just action, followed by silence, the same way she's always chosen to live, away from the cameras. In April 2019, at a fundraiser for domestic violence survivors in Texas, Sandra made an unexpected appearance, unannounced. She didn't take the stage. She didn't make a speech. She sat quietly in the very back row and wrote a donation check. When someone asked why she didn't say a few words, she simply smiled and said, "I think today belongs to them, not to me." There's no video of that moment, but those who were there remember it well, as a reminder that sometimes the most touching gestures are the ones made without any spotlight. Her compassion didn't stop at charity. Sandra has also spoken publicly about her support for mental health programs, especially those focused on women and children. In a rare interview, she once said, "Everyone has moments of weakness, but not everyone is allowed to be weak." That quiet, heartfelt statement has since been shared widely by social organizations, echoed as a message of understanding and empathy. To those who've known loss or watched a loved one struggle, Sandra's actions aren't just stories about a celebrity. They're quiet reminders that kindness still exists. And sometimes it comes from the most unexpected places. From Speed to The Blind Side, from Oscar spotlights to unannounced visits at community centers, Sandra Bullock has left more than just a legacy in film. She's left a lasting mark on the hearts of those she's helped along the way. And what about you? Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that changed the way you see the world? Feel free to share it in the comments, because who knows? Your story might just inspire someone else the way Sandra Bullock once did.